Hi. Hi, everybody. That was the wrong intro. I have the wrong thing brought up. So let me start that all over again. Boy, this is really professional, Murph. Here we go.
We're off to a great start.
Haven't even had any wine yet. Hi, take two. Welcome to the Talking Trains show. I'm your normal host, John, and this is your co-host, Murph. Wait a minute.
I'm John's sidekick.
Yes. Right. He's Guillermo. If you watch whatever late
Jimmy
show
Kimmel.
that is, Jimmy Kimmel show, that's Murph is our Guillermo. So I'm going to ask you weird questions, but you have no accent.
Okay. Well,
Well,
a Midwestern accent, sort of.
if you looked different, you would have an accent.
I guess.
Yeah.
Where's my toupee?
Well, we have one here. Here, you can try this on.
Yeah, there we go. See?
There. Now you
There.
have. Now you have an
Now
accent.
I look like I'm part of the crew.
So we're here today. It's May 15th. We have a really good show today. There was a very unusual railroad in the Santa Cruz Mountains not too long ago. And there was also a big fire in the Santa Cruz Mountains not too long ago. And it destroyed a lot of things, including the unusual railroad. And we're going to talk to someone who's been involved with that railroad for a long time. Before we get to that, we like to open up the show with a little bit of just sort of BSing. So that gives us a chance to catch up.
That's true.
So what have you been up to lately?
I've been working on my staging areas on my layout.
Oh, cool.
I got both the lower staging and I'm almost completed the upper staging, which will allow me to actually start kind of doing the process of doing end-to-end runs and debugging the rest of the layout.
Checking your track work.
Yeah, well, I had a tree ding part of the railroad room, and I think it actually affected some of the bench work. And I found a kink in the layout that needs to get straightened out as a result.
When he says tree, by the way, we're talking a gigantic redwood tree that's on the property. Well, that was on the property.
Yeah.
Maybe it still is, but it was standing up before and then it fell.
Yeah.
And clipped the edge of the house, which was a scary picture, actually.
Yeah, we were really, really lucky. And it hit a corner of the railroad room. It would have taken out all of my engines all in one go if it had just been a little bit closer.
Yeah.
Like 2 feet closer.
So, but that's cool, though. I mean, progress on the railroad is good.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I'm kind of settling into my retirement now where I'm actually getting productive.
Yeah. So there's also something else pretty cool going on, which was I've had Murph over, as you know, from watching the show the past few times. I think you've been on 3 out of the last 4 shows as the co-host, if you include this one.
Right.
And so when we were doing this, or we were talking yesterday, and I asked him if he wanted to be the regular co-host, and he said that he would. So welcome, Murph, as the regular co-host.
Great.
So,
it should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, we always have fun hanging out, so it's an excuse to hang out.
Right.
So we'll have more fun. So anyway, right now we're flying solo without the top secret producer in the other room. So I'll be trying to keep up with the chat on the side here. Just want to mention a howdy to Nate and Dave. And of course, Ray just popped on here a few minutes ago. So hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us. And I guess without further ado, let's bring on Molly. Molly's our featured guest. Let's see if I can make this work. Oh, Joey's here too. Cool. And here's Molly. Hi, Molly. This is Molly Angman. And
Hi.
I had the pleasure of meeting Molly for the first time at the, what was that? The what's it called? Rail Fest, I think, down the
Reedley Rail Fest. Yeah, at Hillcrest
Yeah.
Tree Farm.
Yeah. So in case people watching are like, She seems kind of familiar. It's because she had a part on the podcast and also on the video about the Railfest that I put out. I think it came out already. If it didn't, it'll be out soon. So thanks for coming on, Molly. Really appreciate that. It was really great to finally meet you. And so we want to talk about Swanton Pacific today and also about Overfair Pacific, which is what Swanton Pacific has become. So I know a little bit about that, but I figure if I say everything I know, it'll give you less to talk about. So people would rather hear you talk rather than listening to me talk, I'm sure. So,
well, I can definitely talk about Swanton.
And just let me know when you're ready to bring the pictures up, and I'll bring those up for you.
Okay. Well, we can talk about Swanton, but we have to take another step backwards because our new organization is the Overfair Pacific Railroad, and I get lots and lots of questions as to where did that name come from. And the Overfair Railway is the original name for these locomotives, given to them by builder Lewis McDermot. And for anyone who doesn't know, these locomotives were built in 1914-ish. I think some of the earliest drawings we found are from maybe 1912, but mostly 1913. These locomotives are 1/3 scale, and they were built for the Panama-Pacific International Exhibition, or the 1915 World's Fair. It was in San Francisco. And they have quite the interesting history. They're very unique, that they are not unique that they're 1/3 scale, but that they're very accurate 1/3 scale, with a couple of exceptions, but that they're 19-inch gauge. And I don't know of any other 19-inch gauge railroad in the world. I know there are a couple of miscellaneous pieces of equipment and a few things that are meant to be re-gauged to 19-inch, but nothing to the scale that we were at Swanton or any other railroad that these locomotives operated on throughout their history. So this might be a good time to pull up some pictures, because I just realized that that's not on the stream yet.
Yeah, no, that's good, because and if you want, make that bigger. I'll let you know if there are any good questions that come up. But this is interesting because, and just to kind of fill people in, so in case it wasn't clear, what we're talking about are, well, it's really grand scale, right? Isn't that what they call that? When
I think we're kind of, I've spent years trying to figure out, are we technically grand scale? Are we not? There's lots of debate on what grand scale is. But I have come to the conclusion that grand scale is bigger than 7.5 inch and smaller than 2 foot gauge.
Okay, that works for me. Yeah, because if it's 2 foot gauge, then we call it 2 foot narrow gauge, right?
Yeah. So it's kind of, and like I said, with it being 19-inch, it's kind of on the fringes of that. But I mean, I consider us to be grand scale because these locomotives were modeled off of Southern Pacific prototypes. So to me, it just makes sense that we are grand scale. And that's kind of what I've referred to us for quite a while now. So,
I have a question, and I don't know if you'll know the answer to this, but it seems to me, I don't know if you know this, Molly, but I produced a video about the Billy Jones Wildcat Railroad in Los Gatos, which is an 18-inch gauge, which is very similar actually to the Swanton Pacific stuff, but obviously it's a slightly different gauge. But I seem to recall, and maybe I'm just mistaken because it's been 15 years since that video was made, but I thought that they said something about the Billy Jones 2-spot was somehow related to the Overfair or to the Panama-Pacific Railroad as well. Do you know what that connection is? And are they related somehow to Swanton Pacific?
I know a little bit.
Okay.
There is very much a lot of history with the Wildcat intertwined with the Overfair locomotives. I tend to refer to a few other people who are a little more knowledgeable on the Wildcat side, but I do know some of it. And a big piece of it being that Lewis McDermot actually lived at Billy's Ranch for a while.
Okay.
and that Billy Jones actually did own all of the Overfair locomotives at one point.
Oh, okay.
So-
So all the stuff that ended up
There-
at Swanton Pacific was once his. I didn't know that.
At one point, we'll get to that.
Oh, okay. Sorry,
but yeah,
I don't want to ruin the. Yeah,
you
don't want
just have
spoilers here.
so many questions, and this is great.
Okay.
But yeah, there's a lot of intertwined history, and like I said, I tend to defer to other people who know the wildcat side of it a little bit better than I do. But there was one point where Billy considered regaging his railroad to run the Overfair locomotives. And the story that I heard was he steamed up the 1500. It was the one that we had at Railfest. It was the 060 switcher. And got partway down the line, and as soon as he got to the first curve, set it in the dirt. So the curves at his ranch were too tight, and the story goes, from what I heard, that he had to wait until some of the other guys got there to help him put it back on the rails and get it back into the shed where it stayed after that.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it makes sense why he didn't want them, though, if he couldn't run them.
But he did play a big part in keeping things together, but he also played a big part in where, sorry, happy dog. But he also played a very big part in where everything went. Not only right before he passed away, but at that point, we'll get to that in the story, but we'll just say that the wildcat history and the Overfair history have a lot of crossover.
Cool.
So
yeah, it just goes along with the whatever I'm not remembering, the fact that they were related somehow. So cool.
So we'll kind of start at the beginning because that's a good place to start. So like I said, the locomotives were built by Lewis McDermott, who his family was very prominent in the Oakland area, and they were very well off. But McDermott really didn't have any experience with railroad anything before kind of jumping into this adventure of building the locomotives. In this picture, he's sitting in a steam-powered boat that he built. And I wish I knew what happened to that, because I have no idea what happened to this boat. It was called the Petrel. And
the what?
Petrel, Petrel. And I have just a couple of pictures in our archives of this boat. Or I guess technically it's called a launch. But this is one of the best pictures that we have of Lewis McDermott. And this was before he began building locomotives. So this is a picture of his shop that was on the family property in Oakland. And it's just, this is where the locomotives were built, with the exception of the boilers. Those were outsourced to another company. But I mean, this is the kind of thing you only see pictures of this anymore, with the central drive shaft. And this shop was powered by a vertical boiler and was just feet away from the family home.
That's cool. I like the belt drives. They must have had a big steam engine outside someplace, huh?
Yep. So here we have, so there were 4 Pacific type locomotives that were built, and 3 of them were completed. And the 4th one was at the California State Railroad Museum in Sacramento. It was donated there by Al Smith in either 1990 or 91. I believe it was 91, where they did the entire cosmetic restoration on it, and it sat in the lobby of the Railroad Museum for a number of years. And then a few years back, they decided to remodel it, and it's been moved to a different location. It's in every time I see El DePalo, I ask him where it is because for some reason the name doesn't stick with me. It's at one of the Air Force bases in one of the warehouses there, but it is open to the public.
Oh, cool.
So the 1915 is still on display and it is still available to be seen by the public. It's just not at the Railroad Museum at this time. So, but the interesting thing about it, like I said, it was never completed. It was never fired. And I believe during the World's Fair, it was supposed to run to, I believe it was out to Crissy Airfield. And it was supposed to pick up passengers there. And something changed and they didn't need the passenger service out there. And so it was just not needed. So they didn't complete it. But they did, McDermott did complete the 1912, 1913, 1914, and then, of course, the 1500, which is the little tank engine.
Do you know, Molly, if the numbers are of a product of the years that at least that they were started to be built? Like, did the first one come out in 1912 or?
No, he basically built them all at once, all together, from what I understand, sort of assembly line style. So instead of completing one locomotive entirely and then starting on the next one from scratch, I think he tended to build these all together side by side.
Yeah, it just seems like an odd number, like a really arbitrary number. I'll call this the 1912. Unless the first one was done in 1912 or something like that.
So I think he actually started the planning process and started drawing things about 1912. And actually, we've found there's notes on some of the drawings, and the drawings for these locomotives can actually be found at the California State Railroad Museum. They were donated along with the 1915. And there's notes on some of these drawings that McDermott actually wanted to make, I want to say he had plans for like 8 different locomotives. And they were all going to be this same Pacific type, starting with number, I think it was 1911, or no, it might have been, it was an early 1900 number. But it just, I don't know if he determined it was going to cost too much. I don't know if he determined that 3 was the optimal number of locomotives to have and to for this operation. I don't know the reasoning behind it, but I think he had much bigger plans than what actually happened.
Very cool.
So here's another different shop. There were actually a couple of different shop buildings on the McDermott property. And this one, I think Eric determined that those were freight cars that they were building, not passenger cars, because there were several freight cars that were built. And one of McDermott's grand ideas was to have a freight train going around the fairgrounds and to sell advertising space on the sides of the boxcars. And that did not happen. It was a great idea, but I think there was something with the World's Fair that they decided that was not something they wanted to see happen. But there were a couple of, I think he built 2 boxcars. And we actually did have one of them at Swanton for a number of years. And there was a plan to kind of restore it. And unfortunately, that did not happen. So, but kind of an interesting space, because any of the buildings that were needed to manufacture the locomotives and the passenger cars, they had to be built on the McDermott estate, from what I understand.
Makes sense.
So then we kind of move into the World's Fair, and this is just such a cool shot. That all of these pictures are in our archives, which unfortunately I don't have on a website at the moment. I just have it on probably 5 different hard drives right now. But a few years ago, one of our volunteers at Swanton was helping our historian, who's no longer with us, and they digitized as much as they possibly could. And
Wow.
that's where all of these images come from, is from the two of them digitizing all of the archives and scanning everything that they could. And I am so thankful that they did that, because a lot of that was not damaged by the fire, was actually water damaged from not being stored from the place that they were being stored not being cared for properly. So we're very fortunate to have the digital archives that we do. So anyway, so here we have the 1913 at the World's Fair, and I have lots more of these pictures.
Cool.
So McDermott planned to make a lot of money back during the World's Fair, and unfortunately he did not. He thought that he was going to be the primary or only source of transportation for people around the fairgrounds. And there were actually 3 or 4 other means of travel. And he also thought that the railroad would go entirely around the fair and have lines through the fair, and it did not. He was actually limited very much to kind of right along the water line. And shoot, I don't think I put one of these pictures in here. I should have. I actually have pictures of one of the locomotives on I don't want to call it a trestle, but sort of a track that's been built out over the water in the bay, and right along the edge there, right along the piers and such. And it's just such a cool shot. And I don't think I threw that in here, and I should have.
Well, you can come on another time.
I may have more to talk about another time too.
Well, I think you will, because of, the ongoing progress, which we'll talk about later. But someone's asking a question about the original sort of vision that Lewis McDermott had for these locomotives. Were they supposed to be for personal use, or were they supposed to generate income, or that kind of thing? And I know they were built for the World's Fair, right?
Yes.
But was the idea that he was going to charge, the people, the organizers of the World's Fair? What do you know?
Yes. I don't know how much a ticket cost, but yes, his intention was to make money by doing this. And he did charge for tickets, but I don't know how much. But yes, that was the original intent, was to transport people around the World's Fair, to make money doing it. And I honestly think this was just a ginormous passion project for him. I don't know why. I wish I could ask him. But then after the World's Fair, and I'll kind of get to this a little bit more, but after the World's Fair, he did try a couple of other ventures trying to make money, and they did not go very well.
Oh.
And I wish I knew why. I wish I knew more about it, but unfortunately, I can't ask a lot of people about this anymore.
I wonder if he ran into any problems with material acquisition due to World War I.
That is a possibility.
Very strong possibility, yeah.
On the flip side of that, McDermott made sure that none of these locomotives got scrapped.
Yeah.
And he very much kept the entire collection together throughout his life. So this is probably one of the most well-known and well-seen pictures of McDermott and any of the locomotives. So this is the locomotive that was at Reedley Railfest.
It looks so different, Molly.
Yeah, I know. I know. And as soon as Jordan got there and we were chatting at Railfest, and he's like, I really wanted to put the tanks on it. I really wanted to find the time to put the tanks on it just so it looked more like it's supposed to, and I just ran out of time. I'm like, it's here. That's enough that it's here at Railfest.
Yeah, to be honest, Molly, I think having it in the condition that it was in at Railfest presents a much better story to motivate people to help, donate time and money to get it back to what we're looking at on the screen. So,
yeah. And I have more pictures of that, and we'll get there. But yeah, this is probably one of the most viewed pictures of McDermott with his locomotive. And I found out over the years that the 1500 was not his favorite, and his favorite was actually the 1913. And I don't know why. We all pick favorite things of whatever for whatever reason. But McDermott ran the 1913 the most out of all of them, as far as I know. So, but anyways, that's what it's supposed to look like. And actually, in this picture, I just realized this. The little brackets up on the smoke box, it's supposed to have, is it one or a pair? It might be a pair of miniature air compressors.
Oh, cool.
So,
there's a question. These trains up at Swanton Pacific were fitted with air brakes?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We had air brakes.
I didn't know that. I would have figured at that size they would have just relied on the independent for that. Interesting.
Nope. I will get to that a little bit later.
Okay.
I don't know how really they did it at the World's Fair. I don't know the details of it. But at Calistoga, which I'll get to Calistoga. We're still early. At Calistoga, Randy Jones told me that they were not running air brakes at the time, and that they were just running off the independent. And I guess it worked for a while. I guess it worked there. But everything at Swanton, yes, did have air brakes. And that was a nice feature to have. Being able to stop is good.
Oh, yeah. You kind of need to be able to do that from time to time. I did not know they ran in Calistoga. So please proceed. This is very interesting.
We're getting there. So here we go. So the 1500 was not supposed to be really used for passenger service, but we do have a couple of shots of it pulling passenger cars. When everything was done at the World's Fair, everything sat quite a bit, and I have a couple of sad pictures of that. But eventually the tops to the passenger cars were lost or destroyed over time. So the only pictures that we really have of them with the tops on them is during the World's Fair. And we've talked a little bit about, it would be really cool to at least have a couple of passenger cars with the tops. But we'll get to that eventually. It's nothing firm yet. But anyways, the 1500 would occasionally get used as a relief locomotive for whatever reason, to pull passengers, but not for like the same distances that the Pacifics would pull passengers for, and not as often from what I understood. Because when you've got 3 passenger locomotives, you don't really need the little freight engine to pull things around most of the time.
Sure.
But
that makes sense.
It's so unique. I don't know of anything quite like it.
It almost has a European look to it, to me.
British. It does. Yeah. It does. And I have tried to find what McDermott may have modeled it after, and I can't find, I can't say he modeled the 1500 after this specific locomotive. I can say that for the Pacifics, but I can't say it for the 1500.
Well, we actually have a fair number of British viewers. It's kind of late over there right now, so they'll probably see this program on a replay, and they're all very knowledgeable. Maybe someone over in the UK will see a picture of it and go, oh yeah, that looks like XYZ locomotive or this class of locomotive. So maybe we'll find an answer. So any of our UK viewers watching this on the replay, if you know, or if you think you know what this may have been modeled after, let us know by putting a comment in the comment section.
Yeah, I would love to know, because I've tried to find something and I found some things that are similar sometimes, but not quite the same.
Yeah,
So,
very cool.
And yeah, just the 1500, it's just a really cool locomotive. And I don't quite know how it turned out to be this way, but it's kind of now our spokes locomotive, because I guess because it's smaller and it fits on a trailer easier, and it was easier to get to Railfest than it was to get one of the Pacifics there. But it's a really cool locomotive.
That's a really cool shot of it too.
That is.
Mhm. So, and here is one of the Pacifics. There were 2 or 3, I'd have to look at the map again. There were 2 or 3 turntables at the World's Fair. And I have pictures of the other one. This, I think, is the only picture I have of this one. And yeah, they are much less substantial than the one that we had at Swanton. Had. It's moved.
I understand.
Yes. This is one of my favorite pictures, this big panorama, because you have all 3 Pacific locomotives in one shot, which I don't have a whole lot of shots like that. Again, these are all from our archives. And this is near one of the shop buildings. It's kind of over on the right-hand side there for the Overfair Railway. And it's just a really cool shot. And you can see the turntable there in the middle of it. And
there's a joke somewhere in here about which version of iPhone were they using for that panoramic shot.
It looks to me like stitched together images. But
is this on the website? I think I saw this on the website.
Yes, I have used this picture on the website a couple of times. So
very cool.
But yeah,
that is a really cool shot.
It's one of my favorites. Just like I said, just because it's got all 3 locomotives in the shot at once. So then we kind of move on to after the World's Fair. And this is where things got a little less glamorous. This picture is at the McDermot estate, which eventually Lewis actually lost the estate. He did not pay his back taxes on it. And so the property was seized. And this was after years of passenger cars just sitting outside in the weather. The locomotives, I think, were inside or mostly stored inside. But I think it was in the late 30s, early 40s. I think it was early 40s when this happened. So McDermott also, at that point, when he lost the estate, had made a deal with the Oakland Zoological Gardens, which now, or oh gosh, was it called Alameda County? Anyways, the Oakland Zoo before it was called the Oakland Zoo.
Right.
And made a deal with the zoo management that he and his wife were able to stay in one of the, I don't want to call it a cabin, but one of the small caretaker houses on the property in exchange for building and operating a railroad, which he did.
So he really did lose everything, didn't he?
He really did. But
wow.
what he had and what he kept and what he kept together was this collection of railroad equipment. And so they moved, I don't have an exact number, but I don't think they moved all of the passenger cars off of the estate. I think it was just a small number of them. I've heard that there were anywhere from 60 to 100 passenger cars built for the World's Fair. And of those, only a very, very small number exist. We had We had a couple of passenger cars at Swanton. We had one in particular that had not really been restored or anything, that we had plans to restore it before the fires. But also another little piece of that Wildcat history. The Wildcat runs the same passenger cars.
Oh,
And
okay.
that's because after Lewis McDermot, and after he was no longer living at the zoo and running the railroad there, because his health had been declining. And as you can see from this picture, this is the 1913. This was not a glamorous operation. It was rather rough. The jacketing was removed from the locomotive. I still don't know why. And there's no front pilot truck.
Uh-huh.
And it was because he couldn't make the curves. I don't know.
Yeah, I was going to say, there they are running it that way, though.
They are running it that way. Running it that way. But the Pacifics, if with the front pilot on them, if the curve is too tight, you run into the cylinders.
Uh-huh.
And so he removed the front pilot and ran it as a 062. And years after this, because this operation did not go on for very long. This was only a couple of years in the early 1940s. Just from that amount of running without a pilot truck, the front driver on the 1913 was very sharp, and made it rather interesting. Needed repairs after that. So yeah. So then after this, McDermott moved onto Billy Jones' property, and here we have
There he is.
the 1500 with, that's the 2 spot in the background.
Uh-huh.
And there's a great picture from Railfest that, oh shoot, I'm not sure if I think Will took the photo. That's on the Wildcats Facebook page, that they recreated this photo with the 1500 on the trailer in the background.
Oh, that's cool.
So very, very cool picture. I am so glad they were able to do that. But yeah, so everything was moved to Billy's ranch and stayed there for a number of years. And like I said earlier, yeah, Billy wanted to regauge part of it and run the 1500, and that did not go well. It went poorly. And then everything sat in one of the barns there for decades. I mean, let's see, McDermott moved there in the early 40s, and everything stayed there until, I want to say it was the mid to late 60s.
Yeah, that's a long time.
Mm-hmm. Which is where we kind of start seeing a few people kind of come into this story a little bit more. Randy Jones, who was very involved with Wildcat and very involved with Swanton. I sat down and interviewed him a few years ago and kind of asked him about some of this. And he told me a story of when he was a little kid, that he would ask Billy Jones if he could go in and see the big locomotives.
Oh, that's funny, because they are bigger.
They are bigger. They are substantially bigger. The 1500 was the biggest locomotive at Railfest. So, but that he used to go and sit in the cab of one of the Pacifics and just dream of running that locomotive.
Is Randy Jones related to Billy Jones?
Not that I know of. I don't think there's any relation there. So yeah, so Randy is another person who has been around these locomotives his entire life. I think he told me that the first time that he sat in a McDermott passenger car, he was very, very young, like less than 5 years old. And that was his introduction to the Overfair locomotives. So this little railroad has touched a lot of people's lives throughout the years.
Well, I mean, it's been around for 110 years in some form, so
Exactly.
had to touch a lot of people that way.
Oh, yeah. What do I have next? Oh, so we do have a couple of really cool line drawings of the locomotives. This was actually done for the book, The Little Railways of the World, and it was published in the late 50s. Written by Frederick Shaw. And I was able to track down a copy, so I was really happy about that. But it kind of goes a little more in depth on McDermott and building the Overfair Railway and kind of what happened the few years after that and kind of what some of McDermott's hopes were for it after the fair that unfortunately just never really happened. He wanted to acquire, he'd said that he wanted to acquire the right of way for, I think it was North Pacific Coast after they were long gone, but it never happened. So unfortunately, things were, they would have been great for that kind of operation though, because it would have been kind of like the Romney Hythe and Dymchurch. But again, I think a big piece of it was McDermott's health was declining and, big dreams, but it just didn't come to fruition. So
I have a comment, Molly. There's some conversation going on in our live chat saying that maybe it was modeled after a Great Western Railway 1500, which would actually explain the number if that's what he was using as his inspiration. I guess that's a type of 060T in the UK. Is that the one that you think it was modeled after, or that you thought it resembles?
It's been a while since I've looked it up, but I am making a note of that because I am going to look that up later.
Yeah, Great Western Railway 1500. It's in the live chat as well, so you can watch this later and look for it.
Oh, perfect.
We looked up a picture of it here while you were talking, and it's a pretty close resemblance. Like that would really explain why it's called the 1500 if that was what he was going for. So
that would explain some of it. I will look that one up.
When you see it, you'll see what I'm talking about. But yeah, cool.
Okay.
I told you we might find an answer.
Yeah, that was really quick too.
I say we have the best viewers on YouTube, so
I think you've got some pretty good ones. Yeah. So like I was saying, McDermott did a really good job of keeping all of the locomotives together throughout his life. He made sure that they were not picked up for scrap drives. He made sure that the entire collection stayed together, even if it was short a few passenger cars, but he kept all the locomotives together. So Billy Jones, after McDermott died, he had been living with Billy Jones for a few years. And this is there's a lot of this history that was told around the campfire or, told in front of the roundhouse after a long day. And so this is another story that I heard from Randy Jones. When McDermott passed away, Billy filed a cash claim with his estate because there was no money. McDermott didn't own any property anymore. All that McDermott really had were these locomotives. And I don't know the details on it, but Randy said that he thought that cash claims had to be settled first with that kind of situation. And that apparently the executor of the estate came to Billy Jones and said, I don't know how we're going to settle this because there's no property, there's no jewelry, there's nothing of value except, well, you've already got a railroad, but would you be interested in the locomotives? And I have heard a couple of different versions of this story, so there may be a couple different versions out there, but this is what I have heard. That Billy accepted the locomotives in place of this cash claim and with the intent of keeping them from getting scrapped.
Right.
Because there was as far as I know, there was no provision there to keep things from being scrapped after McDermott passed away.
Sure, because someone might want to scrap them just to get something out of it, right?
Right, exactly. Not see the value in a miniature locomotive, but see the value in scrap weight.
Right.
So, so at that point, then, oh gosh, I'd have to look and see when McDermott passed away, but it was in the 40s. So that's when everything was just sitting in the barn at Billy Jones' place. So a few years later, Billy was approached by a group that wanted to purchase, a group of 3 guys who wanted to purchase a couple of the locomotives and had very big plans and aspirations to basically turn it into a American Romney Hive and Dymchurch. There were some ideas of running the locomotives out of Old Town Sacramento, or there were a couple other ideas I think that were floated around. But eventually, the 1914, the 1915, and the 1500 were sold to the Overfair Corporation, and they were down in Southern California. So the 3 locomotives were moved down to a warehouse near LA, and they sat there for a while. And this picture is of them in the warehouse there in the LA area. And at this point in time, I don't think they actually had any plans on where they were going to run things. They had ideas, but nothing solid.
Is it my imagination, or is that one on the right a lot smaller than the one on the left?
I think it's just the camera angle and the focal length, because the one on the right is the 1500.
Right. So it should look, or it should appear at least as tall as the other one, right? It seems
Right.
like.
It looks like the one on the right doesn't have ties underneath the rails or something too.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's definitely an optical illusion going on there.
Yeah.
But yeah, and you can see this is after the locomotives having sat in Billy's barn for a number of years, and they look pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing how good things stay preserved when they're indoors, right?
Yeah, exactly. Towards the end of this operation, they did not look this good. They did sit outside for a while, and let me see what picture I have next. So the only one that ran was the 1500. And at this point in time, the 1914 had actually not run since the World's Fair, and had very, very little, well, I mean, other than being run at the World's Fair, had very little time on it. So then the 1500, they converted it to burn propane, because at this time they all burned coal. So they converted it to propane. It towed around a giant propane tank. And
is that what that is in the background? It is, huh?
That's what that is. And at Swanton, when we eventually had that, at Swanton, we called it the bomb car. And we converted
I was going to say, it doesn't seem terribly safe.
No, I don't ask those questions sometimes.
Yeah, just run the trains. Don't ask any questions.
Ask the right questions. But we ended up using it as a giant water tank. So we would fill it full of water and use it to.
Good.
I think we had a tank down at the Christmas trees. So, anyways, and then somebody with a wonderful sense of humor, I don't know who, painted the tank up bright red with flames on it, and put Swanton Pacific Fire Brigade on the side of it. And I don't think I have a picture of it after the CZU fire, but the tank was full of water. It was full of water in the car barn.
And it survived?
The tank itself survived. The flat car that it was on did not fare very well with the heat and the weight of that tank on it.
I see.
Yeah. But anyways, so this is what they did at Orange County. And I think they would run it for just a couple of weeks during the year during the fair.
Mhm.
So it didn't run a whole lot. But it was, I have no idea how much track they had. I tried to look up a map a while back and I couldn't quite figure out what they did for that operation. But that's the only locomotive that they ran there. And the 1500 is small enough that one person can run it if you really, really want to. I think we're going to look into how can we make it a little more comfortable for two people to be in the cab, because it's a very small cab.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some ideas floating around there about how to modify it a little bit without changing its look, but just for practicality and safety. So
yeah, it seems like a two-person crew would be a smarter move. Although they do run at Billy Jones, they run the 2 spot and the 5. I guess they call it the 5 spot now, with just one operator sometimes. I mean,
and actually McDermott would have his crew run just one person in the cab of the Pacifics as well. I don't think that's the smartest idea. And at Swanton, we ran with 2 people in the cab because they are big enough for 2 people. It's just a little cramped, but you get used to it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the 2 spot and the 5 at Billy Jones are also big enough, but you wouldn't want to sit like that for hours on end. That's for sure.
That is very true.
Unless you have 2 really skinny people running the train.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a short person, but I'm, not super tall.
Mm-hmm.
And I can fit in the cab comfortably, but I have known some people who have been a lot closer to 6 foot or over 6 foot who have figured out how to kind of fold themselves up to get into the cab.
Right. You know what it reminds me of, this conversation? I don't know if you're aware of this. I would imagine you probably are, but down on the Central Coast at Norgrove, Hayden Siebold has restored beautifully the 2-foot gauge trench engine, right? The green one.
Mm-hmm.
And he's such a tall guy, and the roof of it comes down probably about where his neck is. So every time I see pictures of him running it, I think, boy, that looks really uncomfortable because he has to lean like all the way over, this poor guy.
Yes, I have met Hayden, and yes, I've had conversations with my dad about how could we make it more comfortable, or how are we going to do this with running the 1500? And I've told him that if somebody is really determined to do this, they will figure a way to do this.
Yeah, exactly.
You're right. It probably not for hours on end, but I think we'll figure it out. So here's the other line drawing of the Pacifics, just kind of for comparison, that they really are just quite a bit bigger than the 1500, but still, again, that earlier picture, that had to be an optical illusion with the camera of some sort, and I think it may not have had as much as many ties or something not as tall underneath it.
Yeah. Plus it was kind of further back. It looks like it was about 20 feet away, so that would make it look smaller to you.
Right. So we did find out that if you take the tender off of any of the Pacifics, that the locomotive itself will fit in a 20-foot shipping container.
Huh. Wow.
And that makes them much easier to transport.
Mm-hmm.
And the container can actually carry that much weight.
Mm-hmm. I think we did have to do some kind of reinforcement on some things, but yes.
So is that how they were? I'm sure we'll get to this, but is that how they were transported down to Santa Margarita?
Yes. So there's one container that we outfitted with extra tie downs and some extra bracing and such to go over the locomotive, not welded to the container. They were separate pieces, but extra tie down points and such to be able to ship one of the locomotives out of state. And I'll get to that, but that is something that we did and that we proved works. And then after I keep talking about the fire, and I'll get to it.
Yeah.
But after the fire, that's what we did as well, was we loaded the locomotives into shipping containers to keep them out of the weather, to keep them contained, to keep them so that they wouldn't get damaged any further, basically.
When I was in Wyoming about 5 years ago, I
Mhm.
saw one of the locomotives at the Wasatch Contractors shop. They
Mhm.
didn't let me take any pictures of it, but I'm sure it was one of the Swanton Pacific
Oh
at
yeah.
the time
Um,
locomotive. Is that what you were talking about? That got
yes.
there in a container?
Yes.
Oh, that's
So
cool. Okay, I didn't know that, huh?
if it was 5-ish years ago,
Yeah,
then
it
that would
was.
have been the 1912.
Okay.
And there is a video on the Overfair Pacific YouTube channel where I went up to Cheyenne with my parents, and my dad and I loaded that locomotive and all of its parts back into the container to be shipped back to Swanton.
Yeah, was that when
So
they got shut down?
that was right before that, yes.
Yeah.
So,
Someone's asking how much these locomotives weigh, and
oh,
I don't see it on the picture here, but
I
do you
wish
know?
I could tell you right off the top of my head.
Do you have a ballpark? If you don't, it's okay. Yeah.
I know I have been asked this before, and I know I have looked it up before. And I have a cat doing things. I don't know why, but the number 20,000 pounds is stuck in my head, but I may be totally off with that, and I would have to look that up.
Mhm.
Eric, if you're watching, you can text me that number. I don't know. I don't know if he's watching, but he might remember it. But yeah, they are very substantial locomotives. They are not lightweight. The 1500 came to Railfest, and it came there on a flatbed gooseneck trailer
Mhm.
and was pulled by a 1-ton dually pickup. So that should give you kind of an idea that they're not so heavy that you need a lowboy, or to be hauled with a big rig.
Mhm.
But they are not lightweight by any means. They are very substantial locomotives.
Yeah, one of
Um,
the conversations that I had with the people at Billy Jones Wildcat Railroad when I was producing the DVD there, was the fact that even those engines, which are a little smaller than the Overfair Pacific ones, they're still real engines that carry a lot of weight behind them, which means you don't want to get hit by it
yes.
because it'll do a lot of damage. So, you know, so yeah,
Eric just texted me. He says, "Enough. You don't want it on your toes."
yeah,
So he doesn't
that's
really
very
know how
helpful.
So then we kind of move into, you know how I said that these ran at several different railroads,
Yeah.
all in California. So at one point in time, there were 3 of these locomotives in Southern California, and then there were 2 of them in Northern California.
Can you make the picture big again? It got small.
I'm not sure what I did, but oh, here, there we go. We'll do that way. That works.
Excellent.
Yeah, that looks
Um,
better. Thank you.
So after, I believe it was after Billy Jones passed away, then I'm not sure quite how the locomotives ended up there. I think there may have been an ad in the paper, but Bob Maxfield acquired the 1912 and 1913, and he was a oh shoot, I want to say he was into real estate, but it just dawned on me I may be off with that one. But he was he found a gorgeous piece of property up in wine country near Napa, little town called Calistoga.
Mm-hmm.
And he ended up with these 2 locomotives, and they went through the Redwood Valley shops. And Eric Thompson did a lot of work on the 1913 in particular, but also the 1912.
Yeah, so just so people understand what that is, Redwood Valley is the grand scale 15-inch gauge railroad in Tilden Park in Orinda, California, which is in the Berkeley Hills. And they have a whole, great big railroad up there. Well, I call it Great Big. It's what, a mile and a half of track or something. It's a really cool place. I don't know if I told you this, Molly, but I finally went there for the first time. I think it was the week before I met you out at Reedley. And I had never been there before. It's just a really cool place. And they have again, just for the viewers, they have a shop there and have done a lot of work on other equipment, but they actually built their own 15-inch gauge. What are they? Quarter scale, I guess. Is that what they call that?
Well, they're narrow gauge, so they feel like they're bigger. They're probably, I'm no expert on this. They're probably close to quarter scale because ours are 1/3 scale.
Yeah, I think they're quarter scale. What they told us when we were there. But they actually built all of their own equipment in their own shop there, which I thought was a really interesting thing. So sorry, I just wanted to fill people in because I know what you're talking about, and I try to put myself in the position of the viewer when we're doing this, so that people don't wonder, well, what does that mean? So
no, that's great. That's great for extra context. Because, you know, like I said, this railroad, these locomotives have really touched a lot of lives throughout the last 110 years. And there is so much overlap and so many connections between the different railroads. I mean, yeah, we're 19-inch gauge, but they've been in the Redwood Valley shops, and you were at Railfest, you know, everybody knows everybody.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's a very large community that's small because everyone knows each other.
Yes, that is very true. So the locomotive that ran up at Calistoga was the 1913. I don't know why it was the 13 instead of the 12, but Bob Maxfield owned both of them at that time. And this is when Randy Jones really got more involved with it. Like I said, he grew up with knowing about the Overfair locomotives being at Billy Jones Ranch. But then at Calistoga, he was operating them. He was running them. And also at Calistoga is where we also can introduce Al Smith. Al Smith was the owner of the Swanton Pacific Ranch, and he was also the president of Orchard Supply Hardware. And we can thank Al Smith for the reason that Orchard Supply would put out train calendars.
Yep.
And because Al worked for Southern Pacific for a little while. And you can't say this about very many people. He was run over by a train and didn't lose his love of trains. He was a brakeman, and I believe he fell off of one of the cars and ended up losing a leg. And he was also very heavily involved in the Boy Scouts, and I believe he credits that to saving his life. And anyways, so Al Smith did have a wooden leg, but still loved trains and had the kind of sense of humor that he had a model of the locomotive that I don't think he was run over by the locomotive. It was one of the cars, but had a model of the locomotive that was pulling the consist and would gleefully say, "This is the one that ran me over." But had that kind of sense of humor. But also he was also the type that he would not flaunt that he had any money. He was very humble and very down to earth, and always drove around his little pickup truck and wearing his bib overalls and, you know, looking like a farmer all the time. So anyways, kind of back to Calistoga. This is when Al kind of got reintroduced to the Overfair locomotives, and was approached about becoming a partner, but decided that it was really too far away because he was living in Los Gatos, and so it was several hours away, and he just didn't really want to get involved with something that far away. And again, this is another story that was relayed to me by Randy Jones, because Randy was the one who made the introduction between Al and Bob Maxfield. So at this point, Bob had kind of figured that he had built his railroad in the wrong location, that it was a small community, it was off the beaten path, and it was really not a viable situation, that there just weren't enough people around to make any profit off of this. So eventually, he called up Al again and was like, "Hey, what would you think about, buying this railroad?" And threw out a number, and Al went, no, that's too much. And then a few months go by, and Bob calls him up again, and price had dropped, and oh no, that's too much. Keep in mind, at this point, Al had already started purchasing property in the Swanton area, which is just outside, I want to say Davenport, but Santa Cruz. It's north of Santa Cruz by not very far.
Yeah, let's say Santa Cruz, because I think most people can look that up on a map.
You can find Santa Cruz on the map. You might not find Davenport on the map. But Al had already been purchasing property in that valley and had a ranch, and so he had the property for it.
Yeah, he knew what he was doing.
He knew what he was doing, yeah. So I think there were several conversations back and forth over a few months with Bob Maxfield. And eventually Bob asked him, well, if that number is too much, well, what would be a good number? And at that point, Al had just bought another piece of property just because his neighbors kept leaving the gates open, and he was worried that his cows were going to get out. So when they moved or whatever, Al bought that piece of property so that it would be part of his ranch and he could keep the gates closed.
Makes
and
sense.
He had spent, I believe the number was about $100,000. And Al finally came to the conclusion that if he was going to spend $100,000 to eliminate a nuisance and be able to keep the gates shut, then he could spend $100,000 to have some fun and have a good hobby. So,
Sounds reasonable.
yeah, sounds great, right?
Yeah.
So then I think I have a couple more pictures of Calistoga here. So then everything at Calistoga got loaded up and trucked down to Swanton. And so it went from Napa area, so Northern California wine country, down to just north of Santa Cruz, right on the coast. And so this is not the first time that all of this equipment has been moved. I mean, I hate to put a number to it, but every 30 years or so, approximately, everything just picks up and moves. It's just kind of the cycle here. But since we're looking at this picture of the 1913 on the turntable at Calistoga, this is the same turntable that we had at Swanton. This was built and designed by Randy Jones. And our little motor car that we had as well, Randy told me he started building that for Bob Maxfield for Calistoga, and he finished building it for Al Smith. Because it was right about that time frame. And one of the first things that little motor car did, and I don't have a picture of it on here, I'm sorry, but one of the first things that it did was it went up at Calistoga, and they took it up with a couple of flat cars, and they started pulling the line up, rail, and moved it all down to Swanton. So I think I've got a couple more at Calistoga here. But again, at Calistoga, they were running the same passenger cars, or at least based off of the original Overfair cars. I think there were a couple there's been a few different ones built along the way, but all based off of the same design. So, but you can see at Calistoga, there were some mountains, there's some rolling hills, very, very flat plains for the most part. I believe there was a hill of some sort that it ran up. I don't have a map of Calistoga, and I should really talk to Brandy about that, see if he can tell me. But then, like I said, everything got moved to Swanton, and this is where I become more familiar firsthand with the story.
Mm-hmm. How old were you?
I was 3.
That's great.
This is the story I'm waiting for.
Yeah, this is what everybody wants to know. Yeah.
Yes, I understand. I am the anomaly in the demographic, and I know that. I wish there were more ladies who played trains. I really do. But I understand.
I think they're out there, Molly. We just love to highlight them here. So,
well, that, you know, how about parents that lets their 3-year-old go play in a railroad?
Yeah.
So, okay. So
this
is kind of a fun story. So when I was little, my parents enrolled me in dance classes. And there was one day that Mom took me to dance class, and somebody else's grandpa was there. And I don't know how the conversation got started, but he and my mom were talking, and he was telling her about this railroad, and that it was just this really cool place and great for families to go. And next thing I knew, we're going down to the railroad to check it out. And so, okay, so my dad worked for the airlines for quite a while, but he also was a mechanic in his spare time, and always worked on cars, and still does. And so mechanical things were right up his alley. And my grandpa on my mom's side, also, he was a Chevy mechanic for a number of years. And so I come from a long line of people who are fascinated with mechanical things. So we started going to Swanton as a family. And that was, you know, some people go to the movies and some people go to the beach. I mean, we lived in Half Moon Bay, and we would drive an hour south to go to the railroad instead. So we became very involved in Swanton. My dad was the president of the organization for a few years. My mom was the secretary for a while as well. So yeah, I grew up riding my bicycle around at the railroad. And so yeah, it became our family thing to do. So I have a few more pictures, and then I'll have to jump to a different folder because I didn't get everything quite organized here. But yeah, so these were the early days of Swanton. Everything was moved there in, I think it was 1979, 1980, or right around there. So, and when I say everything, I mean everything that was at Calistoga. Because remember, at this point, at this timeline, we have Overfair locomotives in 2 different places. So the 1912 and the 1913 were moved to Swanton, along with the motor car, the turntable, and any of the passenger cars, anything from Calistoga. We also have the 1914, 1915, and 1500 still down in Southern California. And it wasn't until 83, maybe 84, that there was an estate sale, because the last partner in that organization had passed away, and things went up for auction. And Al Smith and the guys, the guys include Eric Thompson, Neil Vodden, Charlie Hoyle. And if I try to name everybody, I'm going to forget names. So those are the ones I know for sure. But they catch wind of this estate sale that's coming up, and that these locomotives are going to be part of it. And like I said earlier, Al was very much looked the part of a farmer. And so Al ended up finding an ad that he could get a rental car. He could rent a brand new Lincoln with unlimited mileage for cheap. And so he and the guys load up in this brand new Lincoln and drive down to Southern California to this estate sale with the intent of buying the rest of the locomotives and anything that can go with them. And they did. I heard that they sort of acted as a committee, and between, let's see, it was Al, Neil, I think Charlie Hoyle was along for that, and Eric Thompson. So between the four of them, they were able to watch almost every lot that was related to these locomotives. And there was one lot that they lost track of that had some drawings in it. And they attempted to negotiate with the person who had that lot, who had won that lot. And he was not willing to negotiate on the drawings. And so there were a few drawings that were lost. I have no idea which drawings they were, but the rest of the drawings that had been there, because I believe some of the drawings were down there. They were able to get those. They, as a group, they bought the 1914, the 1915, and Neil Vodden actually bought the 1500. And that was Neil's locomotive for a number of years. And then Wildcat had it for a while. And then in the mid 90s, then it became part of the Swanton collection again. So anyways, so they loaded everything up at this estate sale, and magically all of the Overfair locomotives were brought back together again. So
seems like such an unlikely thing to have happen, but there it is.
Yep. It was a very intentional thing to go gather these locomotives up again, because if Al had really wanted to, he could have had a very successful railroad with just the 1913 and the 1912. And instead, he decided that he was going to go track down the other ones, and did. And we were all very glad that happened. I mean, that just, like I said before, as far as I know, we're the only 19-inch gauge railroad. And just having things in multiple places just was not a really good situation. And keeping everything together just makes the collection so much more whole.
Sure.
So I think I've got a couple other pictures, just early days of Swanton. And if you notice in this picture, we have different passenger cars here. And this is a fun story. I have lots of pictures relating to this here in a second. These are not Overfair Railway passenger cars. There's three of them. And we refer to them as the Keystone cars. And Keystone, I still have a few Swanton pictures. There's the motor car that I mentioned, kind of right behind that box car. And this is the bridge over Scotts Creek, which was eventually replaced by the Carnegie Bridge, the Big Silver Bridge. This is an old Ford car.
Made out of a rail car, yeah.
Yep. There were a couple variations of it, and whenever the banks would wash out and the creek would get wider, then the bridge would have to get longer. And that's what we ran into with the Carnegie Bridge, was it had to be long enough to span that space. So let's see, a couple more early Swanton pictures. Fun fact, you can tell the 1912 from the other two locomotives by looking at the front of it. Because when you get a few old Southern Pacific guys around, then they start wanting to play with things. So the 1912 had a few modifications done, one of which being how the handrail runs underneath the smoke box door, whereas on the 1914 and the 1913, it runs over the top. The 12, you can barely see it in this picture because of the steam. The 12 also has a metal cow catcher, whereas the others have a wooden one. So there's just a couple little differences. There's a few more, but those are the ones that I can kind of point out in this picture. So the 1912, once it was running, was always kind of considered the real pretty locomotive because it had more of those Southern Pacific nuances. Whereas the 1913 and the 1914 were pretty much kept to look more original to what McDermott had designed them. So what I said about a boxcar, I didn't realize how blurry this picture was until we get here. But I had so few pictures of Charlie Hoyle that I threw this one in there. And then Neil with the 1500. So for people who don't know, Neil Vodden was with Southern Pacific for a number of years and very clearly never lost the bug. Always loved steam engines and locomotives. And like I said, when the 1500 went through the estate sale in Orange County, that was his locomotive, and he purchased that at that time. So yeah. And I posted this picture on Facebook a while back, and somebody said that they'd never seen that picture of Neil before, so I made sure to throw that one in here.
Oh, good.
So that brings us to, I said we're the only 19-inch gauge railroad, which is why Al was so surprised when he found out that there was a U-25B 1/3 scale 19-inch gauge in Pennsylvania. So this is our diesel locomotive. This is the 502. And this is when it ran at the Alabama Historama Museum at Battleship Park. So the 502 was built by Keystone Light Railway Company in Pennsylvania in the early 60s. And like I said right at the beginning here, the 502 was commissioned by Keystone, and we didn't know who for quite a while. And we found in our archives a inventory list from the Overfair Corporation, which I'll remind you is the group that was running the 1500 down in Southern California, in Orange County. And on that inventory list, and there's no date on it. That's the problem I have, is there's no date to this inventory list. But it lists the Overfair locomotives, and then it also lists a U-25B diesel. But the kicker to this is Keystone, the builder, they never delivered it. It was whoever presumably the Overfair Corporation canceled the order at the last minute, and Keystone had lost money on it because the order wasn't filled. And so they kept ownership of it. And the diesel went and ran at, I forget the name of it, but there was a resort in Kentucky that it ran at for a little while. And I think we figured they had about 3 miles of track. And it was the diesel and then the 3 passenger cars. And then it moved down to Alabama. And again, Keystone kept ownership of it. I don't know if they had a lease type situation or what, but it ran down there until Hurricane Camille in 1969. And at that point, it was buried in the mud and was real rough. So then it got trucked back up to Pennsylvania, up to Keystone's. I don't know if I want to call it a shop or if it was just a storage area, but it was trucked back up to Pennsylvania, along with the 2 passenger cars and the ballast hopper that's in this picture as well. And it sat in a barn after that. And it was in the mid 80s, I believe, that, again, oral history, there's a couple different versions of this. Somebody who was volunteering up at Swanton found an article or a newspaper with a listing for a 19-inch gauge diesel. I've also heard that there was a letter that was specifically addressed to Al Smith saying that there was a 19-inch gauge, 1/3 scale diesel, because Al had all of the Overfair locomotives at that point. And so Al, being a little skeptical, ends up calling him up and going, "Are you sure? Are you sure this is 19-inch? Can you go measure this for me?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, it is 19-inch gauge." And so Al arranges to go out and look at it. And I wish I could remember if Charlie or Neil went with him on that adventure. But Al goes out there. Yep, it's 19-inch gauge. It was looking pretty sad, though. It had been sitting for a very long time. Like I said, it had been through Hurricane Camille. They were told that it had run under its own power when it went into the barn. But everything was so seized that they tried to use a jack to get it to move. And they started to jack the building off of the foundation before the locomotive moved.
Wow.
So it had very clearly not run under its own power. And later, when it was back at Swanton, when they were starting to tear everything down, they found a water line on the flywheel halfway up. So it had been submerged. It had been buried in the mud. It was rough. And I think I had a few. Yeah.
So does this use traction motors, or is there some kind of a mechanical linkage to the wheels?
It is a mechanical drive. Sorry, Eric just walked in the room and he's trying to stand off in the corner and be quiet here. Yeah, but it's a little 4-cylinder diesel. It's
okay.
Forklift axles.
Oh, that's right.
Chain drive.
It's a chain drive and has forklift axles.
Oh wow,
So
fascinating. Okay.
It's very interesting, and it is a one of a kind.
So you can see where being submerged would be very bad for that kind of a mechanism.
Yes.
I have a question, Molly, because you mentioned it before, and I'm a little bit confused about something. You said that this locomotive was on the roster of something called the Overfair Corporation or something like that?
Yes.
What does that mean? What's the Overfair Corporation?
The Overfair Corporation was the name used for the group in Orange County that owned the 1914, 1915, and 1500. So that was the group that was running the 1500 at the Orange County Fairgrounds.
So they're the ones who, at the fairgrounds. So they got that stuff from the McDermot estate when he failed to pay his taxes?
No.
I'm confused. That's what I lost track somewhere.
Okay, I'll step back a little bit and then we'll talk about the 502. So McDermott maintained ownership of all of the locomotives up until he passed away, and then Billy Jones acquired all of them.
Right.
And then Billy was approached by, if I can remember their names.
They're the ones in that were the Overfair Corporation, though, right? That bought them from Billy Jones. Okay, that was the part I missed earlier. You probably said it and I didn't hear it. Okay,
that's okay. But it's going to bother me for a second. There were 3 partners to that organization. It was Frederick Shaw, who wrote Little Railways of the World. Quentin Jervis and Franklin. I cannot remember his first name right now, but it was those 3 who were partners in that organization. So, and like I said, that inventory list that's not dated, date your lists. That is what shows as having a U-25B, which that organization had no reason to own a full-size U-25B. So I believe that's who ordered the 502. which means that the 502 was built to run with the Overfair locomotives.
Right. They would have used it at the fair, right? Fairgrounds or whatever, wherever they were running the other stuff. That does make sense.
So yeah, I assume that that's what their plan was, or possibly even when they were planning on it being a bigger operation and acquiring a right of way somewhere else, that yes, this little diesel would have been perfect for that. But instead, goes to Kentucky, then goes to Alabama, then goes through a hurricane and goes back to Pennsylvania. I have, and then we have when. So, I said Al Smith was kind of a big railroad buff and worked for Southern Pacific.
Yep.
So he decided to go ahead and buy the diesel and the 3 passenger cars and the ballast hopper, and stuffed it all into a box car and had the box car sent to one of the Orchard Supply hardware stores.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where they took delivery of it. I've got another picture in here. You can just see the nose of the diesel, and you can see 2 of the passenger cars in here. But what you can't see is the hopper and the 3rd passenger car that are stacked in there. It must have been quite the ordeal to get it in there. So this is kind of after everything got moved down to Swanton, and it had to be totally torn down to be built back up.
Sure.
And you can see in the background here, 2 of the passenger cars, they've been kind of freshened up, fresh coat of paint, but the diesel's still in the works. There it is. That's the picture I was talking about. That's inside the boxcar.
Oh, geez.
And
it really is stacked right on top. Jeez.
So those passenger cars are a metal frame with wood siding. And I think the benches were some kind of plastic or fiberglass or something. Whatever it was, it burned really well. I hate to say that. And then the roofs were molded fiberglass as well.
Yeah.
So there are 3 passenger cars in here in this picture. And then also that little ballast hopper is very well built. It is very substantial for that size. Incredibly well built. And that's, I can't remember if I have a couple other pictures of it later, but
yeah, it holds up that car pretty well. So,
well,
you lost all the passenger cars in the CZU fire?
We still have the metal frames for 2 of the 3 Keystone cars. And then the 3rd Keystone car, part of the roof fell on it and significantly bent it. And we ended up cutting the ends off of that car. So you see how those little miniature steps are so well formed, and you've got this perfect little railing around the end and everything.
Yeah.
We saw that and went, I don't want to have to recreate that. So we decided to clip the ends off of that particular car. And so we still have that. So the potential to rebuild these cars is there.
Cool.
So then here's a little bit later on the diesel. Like I said, it's got a little 4-cylinder Ford motor, and there are some custom parts in there that Al had to have made somewhere. I'm trying to remember what it was.
It's the clutch assembly.
Clutch assembly? Okay. Sorry, I'm referring to Eric for some of this.
The mechanical questions come to me.
So anyways, I am very happy to report that the diesel did not go through the fire.
Yay.
And I'll get to more about the fire here in just a minute. And here's another one with the passenger cars kind of after they'd been refreshed. And this is how we ran them at Swanton for a number of years.
Nice.
And then the 502 at Swanton. This was before the Black Widow paint job. And all put together, and there's a number of pictures of it where it is just running in black, and we were using it as a work train. I mean, what else are you going to use a diesel for?
Yeah, on a steam railway, that's what they're used for.
Yep. And then a few years later, it was painted up in Black Widow. From what I remember, I don't think Southern Pacific ever painted U-25Bs in this paint scheme, but we thought it looked so cool that's what was decided was this is a one-off locomotive anyway, so why not put a one-off paint job on it?
Yeah,
That is nice.
does look good.
So yeah, and there's the former propane car I was talking about earlier. Giant water tank. So yeah, a few more pictures.
It went small again, Molly.
Sorry.
That's okay. Just letting you know. Yeah, that's better. It looks better when it's bigger.
Yes. So there's kind of the early days of Swanton, where it was Al and his friends. It was a very close, like, friends and family kind of thing. You had to be more or less invited or be in the know that this existed, and very much kept it kind of by invitation only for a number of years. And then, the family grew. The family and friends grew and grew. And then, unfortunately, Al passed away in, I think it was December of '93. And Al left, this is Al Smith of Orchard Supply Hardware. Al left the 3,200 acre ranch and the railroad to Cal Poly University. And it was under Cal Poly's supervision for a number of years. And we had some really good times. We had some really good days through that time. We had a wonderful, wonderful director, Ed Carnegie, who recently passed away. But we were an entirely volunteer organization, and we got a lot of things done under Ed's direction. And so I think I've got a few more pictures here, like building the roundhouse. The roundhouse was, I think, designed that it was going to be built up at Calistoga, but never was. So then it was built at Swanton. And then after Al passed away, there was a memorial plaque placed on the semaphore right outside the roundhouse. And I can confirm that plaque survived the fire. It's still there.
Good.
And of all the things that have been moved to the Santa Margarita Ranch, that semaphore and that plaque are going to stay there at Swanton.
Really?
I believe Cal Poly wants to move it down to Al's caboose, because there were 4 standard gauge cabooses on the property as well at Swanton. And I believe they want to move that semaphore down to Al's caboose and have a little memorial there. And then, what a way to transition into this photo.
Yeah, it went small again.
I see that. My parents wouldn't let me live it down if I didn't put this picture in here. So here you go, world. You get to see this picture. This picture is on my mother's wall. And this was, I want to say it was Father's Day weekend, sometime in the 90s. Rake and ballast, fixing switches. So I like I said earlier, this is the part of the story where I was there firsthand.
No, that's great. You're doing track work as a barely out of toddlerhood.
Exactly. So, anyways,
I'm sure some labor laws were being broken for that picture.
Yeah, not back then.
I was a volunteer, so loophole. I don't know. So anyways, then also, like I said, the Carnegie Bridge. That was another thing that we got done under Ed Carnegie's direction. It was designed by him, and it was built. The majority of it was built down at Cal Poly, and then the final assembly was done at Swanton, and it still wears the original coat of paint that was put on it. I know because I helped do that.
Wow.
I also remember my parents said, "We're taking you out of school for this day for putting the bridge in place because you're going to learn more doing this than you are by staying in school that day." So, let's see. Oh yes, of course. I had to throw a couple of these in here. So me and my dad working on getting the bridge. Of course, I wasn't helping assemble it at this point, but I'm sure Dad was explaining something to me. So.
I want to say something to all the viewers out there, that when you're at a railroad thing and you see a little kid there, like that picture, just know that that little kid may end up being the president of the organization that's trying to put this all back together. I'm serious. I mean, that's something I'm sure there are people out there who would go, "Get that kid out of here. The kid's going to get hurt or doing this or whatever." And it's like, no, we want to encourage kids to help and get involved and such. That's just a great shot right there.
Yeah. So actually, my mom came up with this. Mom noticed if you get the kids involved, you get the parents involved.
Yep.
And we've been saying that for years, because there have been a lot of times where my parents may or may not have wanted to go back or be as involved, and have said that if it wasn't for me going, "Are we going to Swanton? Are we going to go to the railroad?" that they may or may not have stayed involved.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been saying that for years. The other thing is I have horses. I've been around the rodeo arena for a few years off and on. But there's a phrase that always floats around the arena that doesn't matter where you go. And it's that, and there's a couple variations of it, but somewhere there is a little kid watching you who wants to be just like you or do what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And don't let them down.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes for whether you're riding horses and you're showing and you're in the arena, or you're at the railroad, you're behind the throttle, you're setting spikes, you're putting in rail, whatever it is, whatever you're doing, there is a little kid somewhere who's watching that and wants to do what you're doing. Yep. And you never know, they may end up being the president of the organization.
There's something else about it that goes along usually with model railroading, which is if kids are involved in something that they become passionate about, they are learning all kinds of skills that if you were trying to teach them in a classroom, they wouldn't be interested. Mm-hmm. But if they're doing it with their hands on things, they're learning all about that stuff without realizing that they're learning about it. And
yeah.
I call it a Jedi mind trick, but really it's the difference between extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. When you're doing something that you're interested in, you become part of it and learn everything that you need to do to get it done. Well, also it's that same stuff that where as a teacher trying to impart that stuff from outside, it's mm-hmm. not as easy. So there's something to be said about having the kids involved in both contexts, right? Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I'm not trying to. Yeah, please proceed.
No, that's one of those conversations that always comes up is how do we get younger people involved? How do we get kids involved? It's don't turn them away. Find something for them to do. Whether it's, like I said, whether it's painting pieces of the bridge, which I did a lot of that, or raking ballast. Or it doesn't mean the kid's going to do it right. Doesn't mean that they're going to be perfect at it. It just means that you're getting them involved in doing something.
Yep. And that's valuing them. So it's a good lesson. It's a good lesson for everyone, especially the grumpy old guy. That's like the guy I was just characterizing. Get the kid out of here.
Yeah. So I've got a few more pictures here. Oops, let's do that. There we go. So I had to throw in a couple of good pictures of people who've been involved over the years. So this is Ed Carnegie. This is very clearly during one of our event days, whether it was Al Smith Day or Cal Poly Day, or gosh, we used to do all kinds of events. We used to do an event for Santa Cruz Land Trust. 2472, before their locomotive was running, they would come have their picnics at the railroad. All kinds of events. So, and then of course, Ed Carnegie on the left and Randy Jones on the right. You know how I said this railroad has just touched so many people's lives throughout the years?
Mhm.
I just had to throw in some pictures of some people who have touched our lives throughout the years.
Sure, makes sense.
Here's Ed and Marianne Carnegie. Marianne is so wonderful, and I'm hoping we'll get to see her during Best of the West coming up Memorial Weekend. And Ed was actually a professor at Cal Poly and department head for ag. I'm forgetting the technical name, and I apologize. But he was our director for a number of years. And Marianne and Ed just put so much into Swanton that, I mean, I can't even begin to tell you how much they put into this railroad. And without them, Swanton would not have been what it was. Without any of the people who've been involved along the way, it wouldn't be what it was, but especially the Carnegies. So, and of course, Eric would want me to put this one in here. Fitzpatrick as well. He and his wife, Pat, were so involved with Swanton. You couldn't walk into the car barn without seeing Fitz. Just that's where he was. That's where he was the happiest, and really taught a lot of us kids, this younger generation that we are, a lot of things. What else? So I haven't had a whole lot of these pictures in here yet, but this is inside the cab of the 1914. So you can really see that it's just a little locomotive. It's set up very similar to how any of the larger ones would be, and it's just all smaller. There, that's probably a better shot, looking over Randy's shoulder there.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, that we got a lot done under Ed's direction there. This was one of the washouts that this was done by volunteers that we fixed this. But side note, so the crane car was actually built down at Cal Poly in 93-ish. I think it said 93 on it. Also under Ed Carnegie's supervision. Let's see, better shot of the Carnegie Bridge, which is still there. It was not affected by the fire. The fire
kidding.
actually, yeah, I'm not kidding. The fire actually burned almost right up to one corner of it and stopped.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, Carnegie Bridge is still there. It is going to be staying at Swanton. That's a lot of bridge to move, so it's going to be staying there.
Yeah, I mean, if it's in place and wasn't damaged, although it seems odd, like someone going there in 10 or 15 years will be like, what's this doing here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought the same thing, but that's how it's going to be. So I only hope that in 15, 20 years, when someone stumbles across that bridge, that they go, what is this? And they Google Swanton Pacific Ranch and they find something about the railroad.
Sure.
So, let's see. So, you know how I said we could tell the 1912 apart from the other locomotives?
I see it now. Yep.
You can see it now that you know it.
One of those is smiling on the left there.
Yes. There's a little bit better shot.
Mhm.
of the two locomotives, the 12 and the 14. Yeah, like I said, we used to have so many different events, community outreach and various things at Swanton. That one of the, actually both of the caretakers that I can think of that we've had in the past really made an effort to make the property ready for an event on a moment's notice, keeping all of the foliage trimmed back, keeping the lawn clipped and green and ready to go. And it was a beautiful spot. So
I really regret having never been able to get up there.
I
Especially
have
seeing
heard
YouTube.
I have heard that story more than once. That I
Yep.
know there were a lot of people that always thought, I'll get there someday. And I know life happens. That's how it goes.
Well, you don't expect a fire to burn the place down like that, but here we are.
That is very true. We don't expect that. Okay, I put a couple more of these in here. Another big celebration that we used to do every year was New Year's. That New Year's was a huge thing for Swanton. That started with right when everything was moved to Swanton, and they were using the machine shop, what eventually became the machine shop, as an engine house. And they only had a couple 100 feet of track out there at that point. And the guys decided one night, and being Al and Charlie and Neil and whoever else was there that day, they decided that they were going to steam up a locomotive and they were going to run it out as far as they could, toot the whistle, and turn around and go back. And that was kind of how the New Year's Eve celebration started. So every year, we'd run trains from sometime in the evening. There'd be a huge potluck dinner. The neighbors would all come down. Was it the McCrarys that would do the cider?
And fireworks.
That's right. And they would do fireworks sometimes too, back when you could do that. So hot apple cider and huge bonfire, because it would get cold. And if you were running the locomotive, you were doing pretty good because you could stay warm. But that was a big to-do. It grew and grew over the years. And then when we had the washout, everything kind of ground to a halt at that point. But that is something that I would love to bring back, is the New Year's Eve celebrations. Because, like I said, potluck dinner, we'd run up until the evening, have maybe a little break, and then we'd run trains again at midnight and ring in the new year. So I think I had a couple pictures of that. But we had about a mile of track at Swanton, and it followed along Scotts Creek, which is a meandering creek, which did cause us some issues multiple times, but was a very, very pretty ride. What else do I have? Oh, I threw a couple of these in here for before shots, and I do have after shots, but I'm going to skip through a couple of these real quick.
Yeah, we should probably get to the, to the fire and what's happening now, because I didn't expect. Oh, there's a bonfire. I didn't expect this, but it's already 5 minutes until 6, and I'm okay.
So I may need to, I have them in a different folder and they're not as well organized. So I may need to close this window and go into another one.
Sure. I'll take it off of the screen then, and you can do what you need to do.
Let's see here.
This is great though. I'm learning so much about the Swanton Pacific that I didn't know. And now I almost kind of feel like I've been there.
I mean, there's a lot of pictures, and we do have some videos as to some of this, but it's not the same as actually being there. Okay, this is not going to look as polished as it did earlier. Let me see if I can do this.
That's
instead.
okay.
Hang on. Yeah, now that we get into the fire, that it's not as happy. It's not as happy and not as fun to talk about, but it's what we're dealing with. So,
What just happened? That's odd. Oh, there it is. Okay. Oh, geez.
Ooh.
Yeah.
yeah. So now we're getting into some of the pictures that I took as well. So what I was saying about them being in shipping containers. So over here is the 1913 in a container, and then we're getting ready to load the 14, which is on the turntable here, into the container at the end there. That's what we're dealing with now. So the CZU Lightning Complex fire went through in August of 2020. And I believe it was started by a lightning strike up in the hills. And it just moved so quickly that there was really nothing we could do. Had any of our volunteers stayed any longer than they had, then they might not be here today. Yep. So we were fortunate that no lives were lost from our organization. And for that, we're grateful. But I will point out, right behind the 14 here, this roof peak, that's the machine shop. That's the only building that was left standing.
It's a miracle that any buildings were left standing.
Yeah.
So you were able to get some equipment out of there? Tools?
The 502 was in there.
Oh, man.
The 502 was in the machine shop that did not burn.
Wow.
You know how with terrible situations, sometimes you have to find the dark humor to keep going?
Sure.
We've made the joke many times that the termites were holding hands and the termites kept the building from burning.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, that was, yeah. We're very fortunate that the diesel was in there. The diesel needed some repairs, and so that's why it was in the machine shop instead of the roundhouse. Like I said, a lot of these are not really in order, so I'm just going to see what we've got here. Like I said, the memorial plaque for Al Smith, that is still there. It's a little discolored, but it's still there. Oh, we'll get to that one. So this was our car shop and car barn. And if you can see my mouse, part of this redwood tree on the opposite corner fell on it. And
oh, geez.
That's what started the fire in this building. Yes, it was a metal building. The car barn over on the side here was wood framed and then metal sheeting. So when it started to burn, there was no stopping it.
Yeah.
Also, all of our passenger cars were wooden, and all we're left with now are trucks, couplers, and truss rods. So this is not a great shot because of the shadows here, but this is an aerial photo. I found this in the Dropbox that someone else took this. But this is where the roundhouse was this concrete pad here. And it might be kind of hard to see in this picture, but right here is the 1500. And right here are the 1913 and 1914. And this is after all of the debris had been cleaned up. Because there was quite a while there that there was a lot of burn debris still left from the roundhouse. And I just noticed this because I haven't looked at this picture real closely. This track right in here, you can see how that rail is warped from the heat, and it broke out of the concrete.
So were any of the engine frames warped by the heat?
Not that we know of.
Okay.
We have not been able to really dig into that yet. All the springs are collapsed. We know that for sure. When we were working in the car barn, any of that real soft metal, any babbitt material or bearing material had melted and was in the rails. So any of those soft metals are gone.
My upstairs garage burned up in the CZU fire, and I had a bunch of tools and that up in there. They're just ash. I had a 38-pound wine press in there, and everything was slagged. It was kind of like dripping down. And that's fairly hefty metal. So
Wow.
I'm glad you were able to get some things out of here, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for those who don't know, and I'm sure you don't, Molly, Murph is actually from Boulder Creek, which
Yeah.
also was affected by that same fire.
Yeah,
And,
that's just up the road.
yeah. And miraculously, other houses in the neighborhood, I'm going to call it a neighborhood. It's kind of a neighborhood.
It's a neighborhood.
Were destroyed in the fire, but Murph's survived. It was like that one building that was on the Swanton Pacific that made it.
Wow. Wow.
So yeah, we were very lucky.
You understand. Okay, like I said, some of these are really out of order. So I'm a photographer as well, and almost done with my multimedia design degree. One of my favorite ways to photograph things is to stick my GoPro on a time lapse and set it somewhere. And that's what I did for this. There's a few pictures here from last year when we actually started pulling up rail and starting to move things down to Santa Margarita Ranch. So I do have more pictures of the fire aftermath and such. But the biggest thing is, I said Cal Poly. I said that the railroad and the ranch were donated to Cal Poly in early 1994.
Mm-hmm.
And after the CZU fire, Cal Poly decided that they were not going to rebuild the railroad.
Right.
And the ranch had also sustained significant damage as well. The ranch did not lose all of their buildings, but they did lose a fair number of them. I believe they also lost a lot of timber that they had planned on harvesting. But I don't know all the details of that because I was more focused on the railroad.
Right.
But Cal Poly determined they were not going to rebuild the railroad. And instead, they were going to transfer the ownership to a nonprofit, a suitable nonprofit. And that nonprofit ended up being Vintage Traditions, which is based down in Santa Margarita, which is where the railroad is not being moved to. It's the majority of it's already been moved down to the Santa Margarita Ranch. So our organization, the Overfair Pacific Railroad Society, we are going to be acting mostly as like a friends of type group. But we will be doing all the fundraising for the Overfair specific projects. So all of the fundraising that we do, it's going to go right into our locomotives. It's going to go right into the railroad that we represent. And eventually we will be operating there at the Santa Margarita Ranch. There's already the Pacific Coast Railroad there. They are a 3-foot gauge. We are not dual gauging the railroad. We actually will have separate right of way on a different piece of the ranch. So I'm going to see if I can find some more interesting pictures here. That one, I like that shot. So yeah, again, this is from last year when we were pulling up rail and moving everything down to Santa Margarita Ranch. And we did have a few Swanton volunteers who kind of came out of the woodwork and came out to volunteer that week to help get things moved along. But without the guys from Pacific Coast, it wouldn't have happened. I mean, not only is their GM, not only is he wonderful, even though he might be a little grumpy.
You talked about Jeff being grumpy. He's not grumpy.
Who? Grumps Badger? No, we love him. He is wonderful, and without Badger, this would not have happened. He has been the driving force behind making this happen, and several of his guys from Pacific Coast came up and spent the week pulling things apart. And when I was putting pictures together for this, I forgot that I had some video that I didn't use in something, and just watching some of his guys work, I mean, just unbelievable. Just Jordan grabbing the biggest hammer he can find and knocking ties off of the rails. He's a machine when it came to this. And just without those guys, it would not have happened. And I am I am so excited to be putting a railroad in next to them and working with them. And it's just, I can't say enough good things. So.
Yeah. Well, we talked about the community being a big community, but a tight-knit community. This is the kind of stuff that happens when you have a community like that, is people will come from other places and help. And
Yeah.
I'm pretty excited too, because I can't think of a better place where all this would end up. The really ironic thing to me is that it's going closer to Cal Poly than it's ever been by
Yeah.
moving.
Yeah, we've noticed that.
Attempts have been made.
But Cal Poly is not going to be involved.
Right.
They no longer have ownership of anything. Cal Poly is not involved with it anymore. And this is new organization with a lot of people who've been involved over the years. I mean, we may have a new name, but there are some old faces around here.
It's a good place or a good group of people for that stuff to end up with, probably better than anything else that Cal Poly could have done with it. I mean, absent rebuilding in the same place with the same volunteers, it couldn't be a better solution, than what's been found, I think.
Yeah, there were a lot of rumblings of possibilities and potential this or that, and of all of the variations of ideas that I heard little pieces of, this is really the best option.
Yeah.
And
I can tell you, Molly, I when I heard that Cal Poly wasn't interested in rebuilding the Swanton Pacific, I was actually legitimately mad. Like, I can't believe they're going to do that. What about all these volunteers that put their lives into this for the past 2 or 3 decades? But to have it happen, what has happened, which we should go into more details about what has happened. It couldn't be better. I can't imagine a better way for that story to end. And all of that, anger with Cal Poly, knowing how things are going to be taken care of, and the fact that they're in a much better place now, just makes me feel so much better.
Yeah. Oh gosh, there was a lot of anger surrounding that decision, but
yeah,
there was also a lot of just not knowing, and there was a lot that Cal Poly did not involve any of the volunteers in that decision.
Yeah.
And I think that's unfortunate, but there's nothing I can do about it. But yes, of all the possible outcomes, this is the best one.
Oh,
And
absolutely. Hands down.
For the best of rebuilding, for the best of the equipment and the longevity of it, this is the best option.
No, there's no question about that. It's probably, as crazy as it might sound to hear me say this, what's happening is probably better than if they decided to rebuild it. Now, it wouldn't have made everybody, feel better knowing what was going to happen. And everybody involved, I'm sure, would have wanted to have it rebuilt there because of all the time that it had been there. But I'm pretty convinced that having it go to Santa Margarita is a much better solution, because it's a more permanent solution. You're not subject to the same kind of wildfires. Even the weather, I think, and the climate of that area is better for the equipment.
And the creek, we're not right next to the creek anymore.
As more washout.
There's a lot of upside to what's happening. So I'm excited about that. But anyway, probably please proceed. I didn't mean to take over. I had that thought, about the whole thing about being angry with Cal Poly, and what's going on is just so much better than what would have, anyway, please proceed.
Yeah.
I didn't
there was a lot of anger towards Cal Poly, not only from me, just I run the social media for the railroad as well. So there was a lot of anger just coming in there as well.
Oh, I
that-
might have been one of the people posting it.
Probably. But I am really glad that now we get to be bringing to people the positivity of this. That
Yep.
Yes, we all wanted it to be rebuilt at Swanton. There was history there, but this is huge. This is big. This is a positive move. And
Do you know what's also really cool about it? Is that at the Santa Margarita Ranch, there are events there, like the Best of the West that we were talking about earlier. So more people are going to get to see it and enjoy it and become involved and interested and help and everything else. So I think it's just great.
Yeah. I have a picture of something Best of the West in here. These are all jumbled of moving things and
Jack.
this yes. This is that passenger car I was talking about, the Keystone one where we cut the ends off of it, because you can see, I should use my mouse, not my finger. You can see the roof line here, how it just bowed, and it was more prominent in person even. So yeah. So that's the one that the ends got lopped off of it, and so we have that to rebuild from. What else? Oh, so here's kind of a contrast from one of the earlier pictures of the 1914 sitting right here, and how overgrown everything has gotten just from lack of use and lack of anything down there. The water tower is at Santa Margarita Ranch now.
Excellent.
But like, this is what we were dealing with. We had to knock back all the weeds just to be able to find the rails.
There's a lot of great poison oak in that area too.
Oh, yes, there is. And like right over here, our little light stands, that's how tall the weeds are. Those light posts are taller than me.
They're like 7 foot
Are they 7 foot?
to the very top of the bolts.
Oh, okay, to the top of the bolt. That makes sense. My peanut gallery behind me. You're remembering the numbers.
The less pretty host, I guess.
But again, just this is what we were dealing with, just being able to pull everything up. It's just so overgrown. So yeah, just a big contrast from what it was. Let's see. And there we have it cleaned up. And ties were stacked and taken to Santa Margarita. A lot of those ties are still usable. So we will be utilizing that.
Great. It's a great resource to have.
So that lovely picture of me as a kiddo raking ballast, I had to get the pictures of when we picked that switch up and moved it.
Oh, same switch, huh?
Same switch.
Well, you'll get to rake some ballast at Santa Margarita Ranch over that same switch then.
Yes, I will.
Make sure to take some pictures.
So these are a lot of pictures that I took during that work week last year, just moving everything. So yeah. And how things were transported. And so this one, I did not take this picture. Actually, I'm not sure if Randy took this picture or if Charlie took this picture. But that's you can tell that's the spot plate for the 1912. And this is the kind of thing that we're dealing with rebuilding from the fire.
Oh,
I was going to say, just a fun fact about that spot plate in particular, that is actually a remake.
Yeah.
Sometime in the annals of history, the original spot plate was lost. And so I don't know where, when, why somebody recast it.
Most of them were recast.
We can tell because the 1912 is actually too small.
Yeah, we noticed that
should be much bigger.
The font was a little bit different, and the size of the number was different. So, but I think I've actually got a couple of pictures here of I think that's pretty self-explanatory.
I don't even recognize what that is.
That is a spot plate and a whistle.
Wow, it is.
It was.
That part on the right side there of the picture looks like it's flipping us off. That is nasty. I can't believe it got that. Oh, geez. This is a gauge, right?
That is one of the gauges.
That's one of the original McDermot gauges.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh, what a tragedy.
So that's what we're rebuilding from.
Yeah.
It's not pretty. I think we've already seen this picture,
Yeah.
but it's in here again.
Yeah, talk about that though, Molly. Talk about the what Overfair, like what. So you found a place, right? This is at the ranch, the Santa Margarita Ranch, and I mean, you must have like a priority list or something. How do you even start to rebuild from such a tragedy?
Oh, so the first step is paperwork. The first step is all of the official nonprofit things, getting our memorandum of understanding in place with Santa Margarita Ranch, with Vintage Traditions, with all of that. That's the part that's taken the longest. Next, there have been some discussions on track plan and precise location and shop facilities, and next is getting that actually in place and starting restorations. So I think a lot of it, see, our organization is a separate 501c3, and we do not own the equipment. And I know there's a lot of organizations out there that are screaming at that right now, but all of the equipment is owned by Vintage Traditions. And so, like I said, we will be fundraising for specifically Overfair related projects. And whereas Vintage Traditions is a little more all encompassing. I believe there are tractors that are owned by them that'll be at Best of the West, and other vintage equipment. They're not specifically railroad only,
Don't worry about
which is kind of cool, honestly.
So,
but yeah,
is that something that, what is his name, Bob Rossi, that owns the Santa Margarita Ranch? Is he involved with that Vintage Traditions, or?
Yes, that's Rob Rossi. Yes.
Oh, Rob. Okay, I couldn't remember if it was Bob or Rob or Robert, but okay. So he's okay. So he's like the main person behind Vintage Tradition. So is the Pacific Coast also under that same umbrella? I don't know how that. I've never heard this before. Do you know?
I think I'm not 100% clear on if Pacific Coast is under Vintage Traditions or if it's under Rob Rossi Living Trust. That is Badger would be able to explain that better than I can, because I'm not 100% clear on that.
Yeah. Maybe I'll ask him. I'm just trying to understand it for my own, putting stuff together in my head. Ken Middlebrook is on here asking a very important question. He says, when will you build a cab forward to honor Al Smith?
When Curtis Farrington designs one. How about that?
Maybe what I'm hearing from that is that Ken wants to help with it.
Oh, Ken, right? I would love to work on that project with you.
Yeah.
Let me get the Pacifics under control first, and then we'll talk about cab forward.
I think we all know how to get a hold of each other. So Ken, if you're offering to volunteer your time in that process, please contact Molly.
It's okay. I'll see Ken at Best of the West. It's good.
Oh, good. Well, then maybe we'll all have to have a hot dog or one of Jeff's famous crispy cheeseburgers.
There we go. Oh gosh, I am so looking forward to that event. Even though we've got crispy railroad equipment, but I am so looking forward to Best of the West. It's going to be Reedley Railfest was our first real public event as the Overfair Pacific, and Best of the West it's at Santa Margarita Ranch, for anyone who doesn't know, which hopefully you all know by now. But it's like the big event at the ranch for the year, and it's just, there's going to be so much going on there. Yeah, I'm just flipping through some pictures, seeing what else we've got in here.
I went to the Best of the West a few years ago. Really, it was for the first time that I'd ever been down there. And it was the first time I got to meet Jeff, actually. Everyone had been talking about him, so I felt like I was meeting a legend. But it was really cool because not only did they have the vintage, you know, they have the 3-foot gauge train that runs around the property down there, but they had a ton of vintage, you know, tractors. I think there were some steam tractors there. And they had the planes that they did the little, you know, aerial show that was pretty cool. And there's just a lot of really cool stuff that happens at Best of the West. And it's over, for people who don't know, it's over Memorial Day weekend on over at Santa Margarita Ranch on the Central Coast. It's a great event.
This year, it's the 24th through the 26th.
Yeah, that sounds right. The question I have, though, is what stuff of Overfair Pacific will be there? Like, I mean, I know it's there, but are you going to have like a display that's like, hey, here's Overfair Pacific, get involved? I mean, because we're giving people, this has just been a really interesting presentation because you've gone through all this history and really showed people what this is about. And to me, it's like, as a viewer, I'm like, this is awesome. What can I do to help? So we need to talk about that. Like, what can people do, right? And can they come to the Best of the West and see some of this stuff in person and like put their hands on it and say, yes, I want to donate $1 million to build this.
I would love for that to happen. But even if it's not $1 million, I would love to chat with anybody who's interested in all of this. So we are going to be at Best of the West. The 1500, I'm not sure if it even got pulled off the trailer. I think it's still on the trailer. But the 1500 will be on display there as well. We're working on hopefully having one of the other locomotives on display as well. We've got some ideas. It kind of depends on what's going to be easier to move. Because everything is almost everything is at Santa Margarita Ranch already. But as far as having it on display, that's another story. But yes, we will be there. We will have a booth. We'll be right up next to Pacific Coast Station.
Oh, good. Okay.
So anyone who's coming to Best of the West, so if it's set up the same way that it was last year when we were there. So there's the tractor show, and part of the event is over on the other side of the creek in kind of I don't want to call it the lower part of the ranch, but that's kind of what it is in my brain. And then there's a footbridge. You can come across the creek and you kind of go up this hill up to Pacific Coast. So the Pacific Coast Railroad they're the 3-foot narrow gauge, just as a reminder. And they'll be running, they'll be running all weekend and probably more so. But yes, we will be right there next to the loading area, next to the ticket booth, all of that. So we will be, from what Badger has told us, we will be in a very, very good spot just for everyone to be able to see what we have. I will have very, very limited merch. I don't know if you can see from the glare, but we do have new hats, which I'm very excited about. I have a limited number, but they're also on our website for pre-order.
Oh, so I've been posting the website the whole time that you've been talking. Let me post it again so people can go check it out.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not one of these guys that can buy my neighbor's ranch so I can keep the gates closed. So I try to help. I try to help wherever I can, and I think having a channel with the reach that we have here is, I don't know, I think it's of value. So
it helps. Every bit helps, and we are really just trying to get the word out there, and just trying to be a little more seen. At Swanton, we were called the best kept secret in Santa Cruz County. And I don't want us to be a secret anymore.
Yeah.
We need to be out there.
Yeah, it'll be hard to rebuild if it is a secret because people won't be able to help. Yeah.
Exactly.
The original Swanton Pacific was built by, a really wealthy guy. So we don't have Al Smith, bankrolling this thing now. So
Right. A guy and his friends, and
Yep.
we all need railroad friends,
Yep.
And that's the only way this is going to work, is to get involved, be involved, whether it's sharing a video or making a small donation or buying a hat. I mean, it all helps, every little bit. And like I said, we will be at Best of the West. I will probably lose my voice by the end of the weekend because I'll be telling people about this so much.
Well, save a little bit of your voice for Sunday.
Okay, that's right. That's when you're coming down there. Yes, I will. Let's see. So
Otherwise, we'll have to get Eric on, and I don't think he wants to talk too much.
I'm not very talkative.
See?
Because mostly it gets me in trouble. But
so Eric actually is our vice president of the organization.
they let me be in charge of something. It's scary.
I let you sit in on the meetings too.
Do you know what you could have done is, as the president, you could have said, Eric, you have to do this show. I don't have time.
Well, he was at work. So
I was at work when this started.
Yeah, he was at work. I took off a little bit early, but not much, so it's fine.
That's no excuse. Doesn't he know how important you are? This is great, though.
The bill collectors didn't care.
So I just want to point this one out. Have you ever seen a locomotive fly?
I have now.
Have now.
Actually, I have a. I'm sorry. No, please proceed. I'll tell you later.
Okay. So when we were moving everything out of the roundhouse, I know we're kind of bouncing back and forth a little bit here. But when we were moving everything out of the roundhouse, our goal was to not have to roll the locomotives because all of that soft bearing material was gone. And so what we did was we rigged up a forklift and the gantry crane, and we lifted them straight up, and then had a like a flatbed dolly kind of thing go underneath, skids. We called them skids. Roll underneath it, set the locomotive back down on that because there was some square tubing. I don't think I got a closer picture of it, but set it on that. And that's how we moved them from where they were during the fire into these containers to keep things from getting any worse. So hopefully it helped because it was kind of a pain. But of course, all of that needs to be gone through anyway. But this is how we did it.
Sadly, what's likely to happen, there they are. What's likely to happen is you'll start taking them apart and realize that there's a lot more wrong than what you think. So just be prepared to rebuild the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
And when you try to repressurize the boilers, that'll, I'm sure, be exciting.
I hope it's not exciting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
When boilers are dull, that's the best part. When there's nothing exciting happening.
Yes.
I'm saying what I'm saying to set people up to know that it's going to take time and it's going to take a lot of resources. And always with any kind of project, I've talked to people all around that have done, rebuilds on maybe nothing that's been damaged this badly, but the same thing happens in the conversation every time, which is the more you take it apart, the more you realize you have to do to fix it. Yes. Because there are things hidden that you don't know, that you don't realize because you can't see them. So, it's to underscore that whole idea of, overfairpacific.com, go start learning about it now and, start figuring out how you're going to help. And I'm saying that to the viewers because this is something that has a lot of history in it. I don't know. That's important to me. That's one of the what do you call them? Pillars of what I do here on this channel is this history stuff. So, I understand what I'm looking at here, and it ain't pretty.
Yeah, this is a big project, and that we have 3 locomotives that are like this.
Right?
Yeah.
It's nothing but time and dollars.
And lots of energy.
And lots of
dollars. Volunteer hours. That's the big thing.
Yep.
But, on a lighter note, The two spot, which everyone rides behind today at Los Gatos.
The Billy Jones 2-spot. That's the one you're. Yeah.
Yes, that everyone rides behind in Los Gatos. That has been through 2 shop fires.
3
shop fires. Sorry, I forgot one.
Yeah, I didn't. I knew it had been through 1 fire. I didn't know it had been through 3 until we were at Railfest. The 2-spot has been through 3 fires, and it was there at Railfest running, and has been running for a number of years. But that just goes to show that this is not impossible. It's difficult,
right.
but it's not impossible.
Just
and the 2 spots are beautiful little engine too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, takes time, money, and effort.
Yep. So yeah, but it's just going to take a lot to make it happen. But we're here for it.
Yeah.
And Eric and I are kind of in a unique situation because we've both been involved with Swanton since we were kids. I didn't mention that earlier, that I started at Swanton when I was 3, and Eric started when you were, what, 6-ish?
Yeah, 6-ish.
Yeah.
Do you want to come? Yeah. Do you want to come up closer, Eric, and talk on here before we go?
There we go.
I was a part of the group known as Baggers, if you remember who they were.
You mean the Bay Area Garden Railroad Society?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
they're still around. We're members.
Well, okay.
I'm not a member.
When they still had the electric, when the Diablo short line was a part of Baggers still. I was a part of that. And then we went and visited Swanton for an open house.
And then you never left.
And then I never left.
You thought the little ones were pretty cool, but the bigger ones were better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't let this guy around the big boy when it comes out to Roseville in July.
You'll lose them.
He hasn't seen it yet.
No.
I've seen it a couple of times. Ed Dickens is wonderful. I enjoy talking with him, but Eric hasn't seen it yet. So
She always makes fun of me because I'm the 2-year-old, but she's the one that doesn't have to do all the responsible adult things all the time. It gets to disappear and go play with a big boy, and I have to go and be an adult and go to work rather than be a 2-year-old.
So
He doesn't sound jealous at all.
No.
No, but I get to drag him out of the house kicking and screaming to go to Best of the West to go play trains.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, see? It works.
You'll have to do what works.
Yes. So I think we've gone through about all the pictures that I have to show on this. I know we went way over, but you got a really good history lesson though.
Oh, we really did.
Yeah.
You did a great job. And I really appreciate all the knowledge you pushed out here and the encouragement for people to get involved.
Yeah. And that's really what we want is we just want to get the word out and let people know, hey, we're here and things have moved and it's not dead. And we want people to get involved and going to our website, overfairpacific.com. You can sign up for our email newsletter. I just sent the first one out a couple of days ago. And so I will be sending that out again to anyone else who signs up fairly soon. Probably anyone who signs up probably in the next week or so, because we're going to be at Best of the West and we're going to be busy there. Like I said, we've got a new merch store. I've got just a couple of things in there. I will have limited stuff at Best of the West, but it's a work in progress. We're building. And we want people to be involved because that's how it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So,
Nothing happens without people.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, with that, is there anything else that you wanted to mention? I thought that was a great wrap up.
I don't know. I've been talking for a few hours, so I hope I covered it all.
I feel like I've got a great education on the whole history. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, Eric, before because we ran about 35 minutes over what we were planning for, which is okay. I mean, it's important though. So
yeah. We have a reasonably active Facebook page. Things have been a little hectic lately, so not as active lately. But we are on Facebook, we are on YouTube. And I try to keep the website updated as much as I possibly can. I've actually been putting a lot of the old Swanton newsletters up on our website, so they're great for reference because there is so much history and so much in those. So yeah, thank you guys. Thank you for having me on. Thank you for having us on. Thank you for letting me talk railroad history for so long.
That's what this is all about. You see this? It says talking trains.
Yes.
So thank you for taking the time. And if you want to hang around for another minute and a half until the music is over, we could wrap up off. Why do I have a thumbs up over my face? What just happened? Did you see that?
I did see that.
Again. Yeah. I must be smiling, and it's like, oh, this guy's so happy. I'm going to give him a thumbs up. What's
There's
up with that?
Preference where you can turn that off.
Oh,
I can't remember where.
We'll be looking into the preferences to turn that off because that's a bit of a distraction.
Yes. And you'd hate to figure out what other things it can do.
No, it does. It does something else. If you get all excited and do it does fireworks and stuff. It didn't do it this time, but I've seen that. It's crazy technology.
Yeah,
it's probably some AI. Yeah, it's probably some AI cyborg thing getting into my brain or something. Oh, geez. Yeah, I'm getting a little punchy here, so I think it's time to end the show. So anyway, thank you very much. We'll see you a little bit less than a week, I guess. Now Murph gets a thumbs up. And we'll see you down there on Sunday and hopefully catch up a little bit more. And I do want to thank everybody for watching who's stuck with us this whole 2.5 hours. It's kind of a marathon show today. And also thanks to the moderators for keeping things on track, pun intended, in the chat. And we'll catch everybody on the next Talking Trains show next month. See ya.
Catch you next month.
Bye.